I'm an MD. I'm board certified in internal medicine. I've been assistant professor at different medical schools, mostly in New York, most recently the University of Miami. And I got interested in electromagnetic fields after my administrator at the University of Miami gave me a new iPhone. I used it for 20 minutes on speaker, and my finger was burning at the end of the call. So that was years ago. I started reading about the science and connecting with other scientists, and really my expertise, I've taken care of a lot of patients with chronic disease. So when I talk about diabetes and, for instance, heart failure, that, the National Toxicology Program shows clear evidence of cardiomyopathy in that study. In other words, that's a precursor to congestive heart failure. And I want to just read one thing, if you'll allow me. This is from the United States Renal Data System, Healthcare Expenditures for Persons with Chronic Kidney Disease. So over half of the 2015 Medicare spending for beneficiaries aged 65 and older was for those who had diagnoses of CKD, diabetes mellitus, or heart failure. All three of these conditions, when you look as an independent scientist, not someone who's funded by wireless, all of those three conditions are linked. So diabetes and heart failure are linked with EMF exposures. It's very clear.
Doctor, what are you're a trained medical professional?
Yes.
We don't have one on the panel. What are we to make of the American Cancer Society, for example, telling us there's no evidence of harmful product?
Well, at this point, there's a national and international 5G appeal. I don't know how many thousands of people have signed. But the point is that many of these organizations have conflicts of interest. And I can't speak to, I don't know who's on their board, who made these decisions. My testimony comes from, I've been reading this literature for years. And really, I got interested in it because I've spent my career taking care of so many patients who were sick in the hospital that when I found out about the links, I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. So I've read these articles myself, and the experts who don't work for telecom and who are in their independent research, everyone comes to the same conclusion. This isn't, we're not in a place where we should be debating this anymore. This is exactly what happened with tobacco. It's the exact same thing. And really, right now, the only people who are able to protect Americans are our legislators, because we don't have any relevant regulatory guidelines to protect human health. The FCC guidelines were developed for short-term exposures, 6 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on it's a phone or an outdoor exposure. And they have absolutely no connection to the biological effects that have been very clearly summarized in the Bio Initiative. That's a huge document generated. All of the summaries are there. And I've got it here for you if anyone wants to read it. I have very concise summaries and abstracts documenting everything that I'm saying.
Infrastructure densification is not the only difference between 5G and standard technology. Telecom technology. The signaling characteristics of 5G are incredibly complex, using what's called phased array and beam-forming technology. Such characteristics are known to have hazardous impacts to humans as well as other species. Millimeter waves couple maximally with skin tissue. Thin-skinned amphibians are at special risk, and insects, because of their small size, are in particular peril from millimeter waves. Effects are caused not by the power density and tissue absorption, which is what the FCC standards are based on, but are rather by the signaling characteristics alone. That's a huge and very important point. 5G is not like anything that we have going now. And 5G actually has the theoretical ability, even at very low power densities, to punch irreparable holes in the food chain. What affects insects affects everything. There is no environmental oversight for such effects to non-human species. FCC exposure standards do not include wildlife. They are strictly for short-term acute exposures to humans, not the long-term chronic low-level exposures that are common today. Current FCC standards adopted in 1996 are also obsolete and inadequate to protect even human health.
My granddaughter is a very light-skinned red hair, blue-eyed child. Her skin is very sensitive. My daughter is darker haired like I am. If they have sunscreen on, they still will get a different dose of ultraviolet light, even though they have the same exposure. Because the exposure may be uniform, but the amount they will absorb differs because the properties of the skin, the property of the eye, the thinness of the skin, and a number of other variables. And those same things are relevant when it comes to thinking about cell phone radiation. Now, way back in the dark ages, when the standards were developed, two-dimensional modeling showed that children and smaller adults might absorb more radiation than larger adults. And this was scalar modeling that has now been superseded, done by Om Gandhi in 1996. Interestingly, and this is why I'm really delighted to be here, Dean, when he did this work in 1996, he was working with support from Motorola and the Department of Defense. And after he published this, he lost all his funding. Professor Gandhi, with whom I'm collaborating now, updated his work in 2002, here showing you that a smaller adult head here, you see the amount of exposure is quite similar, but because the head is smaller, it will absorb proportionally more. More recently, we have been working with colleagues at Porto Alegre with Environmental Health Trust, and we have developed three-dimensional modeling with anatomically based models using MRI to create the models with 1 millimeter voxels. And what we have done is to show the difference in radiation dose in heads of different ages and sizes. And I'll just show you one example here, coming from our colleagues at the Swiss National Institute of Technology, the ITIS, which have produced some of the most brilliant work in the world in this field. And they have shown here, of course, that there is going to be greater exposure, absorption into a younger head versus an older head. This is another item from their website of target tissue dose for the infant with using a system called the virtual family. Is there anyone here who's worked on the virtual family? Right. It's a really powerful and very sophisticated system that is used today to set standards for medical devices and surgical procedures, but it's not used for mobile phone standards. I find that odd. And I want to show you an example of some of the work that we are doing now that I'm releasing here for the first time. And this is a modeled microwave radiation dose of a 6-year-old with greater levels to the frontal and temporal lobes, eyes and cheek. And watch this here. Now, yellow, white, and red are the hottest, all right? And if you look carefully, you will see it's going into the eye, the nose. Do it again, just so you'll get to see it. And partly into the brainstem. Now, that's just showing you that there's going to be some exposure into that area of a young head. It doesn't tell you that there's any biological effect.